Okay, dear all, I know it is hard to stop the lunch from Rode Rose and Tatilia, but I'm happy you're here in this room. And may I wish you a warm welcome on behalf of the board of DEWIS, Delft Women in Science. My name is Marja Elzinga. I'm chair of the board, and I'm really happy to welcome you here with the very nice program of this afternoon. This afternoon, we have the theme diversity, creativity, and innovation, and we have two excellent speakers. In the second half of this afternoon, we have the DEWIS Award ceremony for the best female PhD student. But before going to this program, I would like to use this place and time to give you some highlights of Delft Women in Science. I see many new faces, and for those who are not familiar with DEWIS yet, DEWIS aims for a gender inclusive and diverse Delft University. What does DEWIS do? We do support female academists in our university. For that, we organize events, lunch meetings, symposia, workshops to put diversity, gender diversity on the agenda. And finally, we provide recommendations to our board, our deans, and all in the university who make decisions. And I'm happy to see that the chair of our board is here this afternoon. And more, DEWIS focuses on gender diversity, but diversity and inclusion is in the strategy of our university. We have a diversity officer nowadays, and DEWIS is cooperating more and more with those who represent other types of diversity and inclusion in our university. Then some figures. We see here that we work in a male-dominated environment. When we look at the level of PhD students, we see it in the picture. It's about 30% female, 70% male. The assistant professor level is about the same. When we go to the associate professor level, it's 18% female, and when we go to the full professor level, it's 15, which is quite an achievement compared to the past. Here we see the development of the full professors in our university. And I think it is worth mentioning that 2017 was the year that it was 100 years ago that Westerdijk, she was the first female professor in the Netherlands. And to celebrate that 100 years, our Minister of Education suggested to push up the number of female professors. And that was the Westerdijk Impulse, Talent Impulse. For Delft University, that resulted in 9 more female professors. And that's how we arrived at 50%. And then finally, some achievements. What did we achieve? I think diversity is on the agenda, not only to us, but because diversity and inclusion are more important in our whole society. So in our university, together with TrueU Delft, with the Studium Generale, we organized a series of lectures, Talk Diversity. It is a whole range of lectures, quite well attended. Then we have, of course, our DEWIS lunch meeting. In every faculty, we have meetings where the local people organize the gender issues in their faculty. And something I'm really happy about, that is the action that is taken in our university to deal with implicit biases. Some years ago, we had a DEWIS Symposium with Naomi Ellemers, Paul Walton, who explained us what implicit bias is and how you can deal with it. And in our university, we have now pilots with observers in committees appointing professors, and committees are attending implicit bias trainings. So HR is really working on this issue. And then, as DEWIS board, we visit the deans in all the faculties. We ask the deans what they do to create more gender-balanced faculties, and we see a lot of actions, different actions, in all the faculties. And then finally, the Diversity and Inclusion Award. The first awards were handed over to previous board members, Karel Luyben and Anka Mulder. They did a lot to put gender, diversity, and inclusion on the agenda. Then we thought, well, they made a difference in the university, but many of us can make a difference in our university when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And we want to encourage these kind of actions, events. So that's why we decided, together with the diversity officer, that it would be nice to have some kind of a diversity and inclusion competition, which is open, but it will be launched by a series of articles on diversity and inclusion in Delta, also here today, to draw attention to these initiatives and the importance that Delft University attaches to diversity and inclusion.
So our research focuses on creativity and innovation in the workplace, development of leadership and creative problem-solving skills, and leading creativity individuals. So our research has been published in several journals. She served as associate editor in a few journals, such as the Journal of Leadership and Organizational Studies and the Journal of Business and Psychology. And she's also the editor of the Psychology of Creativity, Aesthetic, and the Arts. She has published 3 books on the topic of creativities. And in her presentation, Roni will discuss the effect of diversity on team creativity. Research suggests that the diversity of team members may be helpful to creativity, but can also interfere with effective team functioning. So the presentation will discuss the role of the leader, especially with diverse and creative teams. So welcome, Roni, please.
This is fine. I think so. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let me start by saying that a lot of the work that I do, again, is on creativity and innovation in teams. I have way more slides than I'll be able to cover in 45 minutes. I'm going to skip a few, but if you want the slides, Astrid has them, and you're welcome to get the entire set. And if you have questions after the question and answer, I'm happy to answer them later, or you can send me an email. So why creativity? It's important, but why is it important? Because we find that really in the current environment that we live in, the problems that we face are really complex. And those complex problems can't be solved by one person. We need a group of people to do that. Organizational survival is based on whether organizations can come up with creative ways of doing things, whether it's a new product or whether it's just a more creative way to address customer problems or reducing time to make more efficient decision-making. Whatever the case may be, creativity and innovation matter, and organizations are looking for it. Why creativity in teams? Again, we need multiple people, different disciplines, different perspectives to solve problems creatively. basically what we would like is to gain performance benefits from that diversity that we have in the team. That's the hope. The problem is that we don't always get there. So I'll talk about why that may be the case and what we could do to address that as part of this discussion. But before I move on, anytime I talk to people that are not students of creativity, don't study creativity for a living, I get this, well, how do you know, we can't define creativity. Yes, we can. And we have defined creativity for many, many years in this field as any product, process, idea, or solution that is both novel, that is original, and useful, appropriate, solves a particular problem. You need to have both. If you have something that's original but not appropriate or not useful, the organization can't use it. We can't do anything with it. If you have something that's useful but not novel, that's great, it works, but it's not creative. So we need both in order to define it as creativity. Now, only in recent years have we started to understand teams as the creators. In the past, what we've done is we looked at individual creativity within a team, and we use team as a context. We're moving toward understanding of team creativity as a unit as a whole, and that has different implications for our understanding of team and team creativity. During this talk, I'm going to use the input, process, output model of teams. Basically, we have an input, what is the team brings in, the characteristics of the team and the members, the process, what are we doing as a team, and then the output, obviously, is that of creativity. In terms of process, I'm going to briefly touch on social processes and cognitive processes that happen in a team. And if somebody, because I have so many slides, if somebody could give me the 5-minute warning, that'd be great. Okay, so how are teams diverse? We typically in social sciences divide diversity into two big buckets of demographic characteristics. These are things like gender, age, race or ethnicity, national culture, nationality or culture, religion, those kinds of things. And then there's what we call, or actually 3 big buckets, sorry. Personal characteristics, things like personality, motivation, and values, and functional diversity, which has to do with the job title that you have, the department you're in, your educational background, and so on. Of course, for the most part, or some of the demographic characteristics are particularly salient and visible, right? You know, women versus men, easy to tell. Certain racial characteristics, like if you're black, certain nationalities or cultures and so forth, certain religious symbols or dress. Others, not so much, right? We don't know if we're different from each other in terms of our personality or motivational characteristics until we get to know people. What is interesting is that the research on diversity, there was a meta-analysis that was done in 2009 related to diversity, to team characteristics and creativity. And what they found was the demographic diversity was really not related to creativity. Now, why is that? What they did find is that functional diversity was related to creativity. That is, if you bring together a team where people are from different backgrounds in terms of their job, that matters. Now, the problem, I think, with the diversity piece and why it didn't come out is for 2 reasons. One is they looked at one issue of diversity. A lot of these studies looked at one issue of diversity at a time, right? Women versus, you know, all male teams, all female teams versus mixed teams. Age, you know, only race. Very few studies look at the intersectionality, meaning, you know, I'm not just a woman, right? I have multiple other demographic characteristics. And if you start parsing it out that way, it's hard to do the research because you get too few representatives. But I really think that matters. The other thing is that I think what they didn't look at and what they did not differentiate is whether these demographic characteristics have any bearing on the task at hand, right? So there are areas where getting the input from different constituencies by gender or by race or by age may be important and relevant, right? Like when you're dealing with HR decisions or policies of a university. And there are others where maybe it doesn't matter as much. And people are people. They did not differentiate between those kinds of studies. So if you give the team a fictitious problem, so one of the things we like to do when we study creativity is ask people for uses for a brick. I don't know that gender necessarily matters for this fictitious problem. But one of the discussions right now in the US, for example, is the fact that we have very few apps, if at all, phone apps that deal with the aging population. Why is that? Because app developers are not old. They don't deal with those problems. Most of them are in their 20s. They're not even worried about their parents being old. And it's really, they're starting to see some of that because there are some app developers that are moving into their 40s and going, my parents are old. I need some support. I need to figure out if they're taking their medication or if they've fallen down. In this particular case, age matters. Okay? We see the same thing with toys. Lego now has pink Legos and girl Legos, but for the longest time they didn't. Right? So when we look at those things, trying to understand whether age or gender or whatever demographic characteristic, whether that matters in terms of finding a solution or coming up with an idea for a product or anything else, or even a process, let's say at the university, what's our promotion process, right? Do demographic characteristics matter? I think once we start separating that and separating the ones where it doesn't matter from the ones where it does, we'll see demographic differences. So what are the strengths of diverse teams? And in this case, I'm talking about diversity in general, including gender diversity, but not only. We have more information. Diverse teams have more information than non-diverse teams. We have different points of strengths and weaknesses and knowledge that we can bring to bear on the problem. We have different perspectives, different knowledge. And all of those results in what we call cognitive benefits. That is, the thought processes associated with creative problem solving or general problem solving will be enhanced when we have a diverse team. But what are the weaknesses of diverse teams? What we find is that in diverse teams, we have more difficulty in communication. When people are different and bring different perspectives and have different experiences, sometimes it's hard to talk to them. They don't always understand our point of view or what we're trying to say. I work a lot with teams that are interdisciplinary, and one of the things that we find, and I've found this consistently across teams, is that it takes somewhere between several months to sometimes 6 months to a year just to get our vocabularies aligned, because different disciplines use the same term and mean different things, or we use different terms and mean the same thing, and it's very confusing, right? So we have to get past that difficulty in communication. When we're different, it's hard to develop trust, okay? And this is where the diversity piece, or the demographic diversity, particularly the visible demographic diversity, plays a role, because if I can immediately tell that you're different than me, and therefore there's these barriers that we need to break down. So those create social deficits, right? So these are things that relate to social processes. So what I want to do is talk briefly about social processes and cognitive processes and where those benefits and deficits exist, and then talk about what leaders can do to facilitate the benefits and reduce the deficits. Because one of the things that we find is that we can get those cognitive benefits only if we overcome the social deficits. So these social processes are really the glue that keeps teams together. And there are multiple models in social science about how teams operate and what are the important social processes. There are a number of common elements or common processes that come about across those different models. Collaboration and coordination, communication, trust and psychological safety. Psychological safety is this notion that it is a safe environment and I can be vulnerable, which means I can speak up and say things and take risks. And then conflict. So, what we're finding is that collaboration is important for teamwork, not surprisingly. Teams that emphasize collaboration as a goal, right? So the team itself thinks collaboration is important. Those tend to engage in more creative activities like idea generation. So that's one thing a leader can do, right? Create an atmosphere and facilitate collaboration and emphasize how important collaboration and working together is. And particularly effective collaboration allows teams to integrate those diverse perspectives that come from the diversity of the team. Okay? They allow for different team members to speak up, voice their concerns or opinions, and allow for the different differences to shine, and then say, okay, how can we put this all together and integrate this diversity as opposed to ignore it, which sometimes happens, right? So you have a diverse team and somebody voices a concern and it's promptly ignored by the rest of the team, particularly if that is voiced by a minority member of the team, and it doesn't matter which minority that is. Again, leaders can be very helpful here by not ignoring the diverse perspectives and by focusing on the need for integration. Communication is really meaningful for diverse teams. We have both internal communication issues and external communication issues. One of the things that we find, particularly when we talk about diversity in terms of functional job diversity, that we have more sources of information externally. So if we have a member of a team that's from computer science and a member of the team, let's say, from psychology, and a member of the team that's from chemistry, well, we have different networks of people that we know and experts that we know that we can go to. We will get more information and more diverse information from those people. So, external communication seems to be a really good predictor of team creativity. The more teams communicate with different constituencies, whether it's outside networks, customers, and so forth, the more creative those teams are. Similarly, if you have a member of the team that's in production, a member of the team that's in supply management, a member of the team that's R&D, a member of the team that's in their PR or marketing or and HR, you're going to get those different perspectives as you're preparing for product launch and know what you need to do. So external communication allows us to get access to more information, more diverse information, and develop support for new ideas within and outside the organization. When we have diverse teams, though, internal communication matters a lot. Okay, I mentioned earlier that diverse teams can have difficulty in communication because they have different experiences, different backgrounds, different knowledges. All of those things contribute to difficulty in communication. So how do we overcome this? Well, one of the things that we find in relation to creativity is that when we have positive forms of communication, like collaborative communication, that's beneficial. Negative forms of communication, like conflict, are not good, which you will say, well, of course, duh. Okay, easier said than done. So again, the leader here can facilitate those positive forms of communication through modeling, right? So if the leader engages in negative forms of communication with the team members are going to engage in negative forms of communication. If the leader facilitates positive forms of communication, both within the team, but also with he or she himself or herself engages in these positive forms of communication, you will see more positive communication. In addition, when the leader sees negative forms of communication, it's really important to put a stop to it, right? So your job as a leader of a team is to say, no, we can't talk like this. This is not appropriate. And sometimes that's not easy. It's not an easy job being a leader to facilitate those kinds of things. Trust and psychological safety are really important for creativity, particularly in diverse teams, because you start with the starting point for diverse teams is much lower in trust. When we're in a team with people like us, whoever you are, when you're with other people that are like you automatically have higher trust in them because they're like you. You assume that because they look like you, sound like you, they also think like you. Maybe it's a wrong assumption, but we all make it. When we're in a team with diverse people, our trust threshold is higher. They need to first show us that we can trust them. So, but trust is critical for creativity. When do we get creativity? When people make suggestions for new things. Is it easy to make a suggestion for something new? Nope. You need a lot of trust. You need to believe that people won't make fun of you for bringing up an idea that hasn't been tried before. You need to feel psychologically safe. And what we're finding is that when we create new teams that are diverse, that doesn't exist immediately. That's very, very difficult to achieve. It takes time, and it takes good leadership. But trust and psychological safety are linked to members being willing to discuss information openly, candidly, willing to critique ideas, willing to bring up new ideas. And interestingly, and I find this finding particularly interesting, is that when you have ambiguous information, if there's low trust, that ambiguous information tends to get interpreted negatively. If you have high trust, that ambiguous information tends to be interpreted positively. So that low trust then contributes to further low trust. It's this absolutely terrible cycle, right? So because most of the information that we encounter is not clear-cut, good or bad. We always bring our interpretation. And trust also relates to conflict. So when we talk about conflict, we talk about either relationship conflict or task-related conflict. What's the difference? Task conflict is we disagree about the solution to a problem. We disagree about the right process. to take, okay? It's very focused on what is it that we need to do, what are the next steps. Relationship conflict is, I don't like you, right? We just don't get along. The notion is, or the idea was, that task conflict might be good for creativity, right? If we disagree about the right solution, we can voice our disagreement and hopefully we'll get to a better idea or better solution to the problem. Relationship conflict, on the other hand, is really bad for creativity regardless of how strong it is, okay? Any relationship conflict is not good. But what we're finding is that the results regarding task conflict are mixed. And the current thinking is that probably what is happening is too little task conflict means that we all agree we're not challenging each other to think differently. And that's not good for creativity because we'll settle. Too much task conflict becomes relationship conflict. If the conflict is so strong, we start to resent the other people. And then we develop relationship conflict. It's that middle level, which we can't quite quantify yet, that seems to work for creativity. That some relationship conflict is good, or some task conflict, some disagreement about what we're doing is good because it gets people talking, it gets people thinking, but too much of it is not good. Now, one of the things that we're finding is that those social processes are interrelated. It's very hard to separate them, right? So in order to develop trust, we need communication, and communication is facilitated by trust. So you have this cycle. In order to collaborate, you need communication, and so on. So low trust leads to conflict. High trust leads to less conflict. So all of those things are interrelated, and it's sometimes very hard to separate them. In terms of cognition, thought processes, how do we solve problems in teams? What are the thought processes that are happening in a team environment? As I said, diverse teams have social deficits. It's harder to develop trust. They tend to have more conflict. It's harder to communicate, but they can bring social benefits. The work that we typically see focuses on social cognition, meaning how do we think about other people and teams, things like shared mental models and reflexivity. Shared mental models basically means that we share as a team our understanding about what it is that we're supposed to do, our task, and what people know, who the people that we should approach are, who has what knowledge of where or what. And we're finding, again, mixed results with sometimes positive relationships, but sometimes negative relationships, because shared mental models means that we think alike, right? So creating that thinking alike in a diverse team is much more difficult and takes time, but it can lead to conformity. And again, this is where leadership can really make a difference, because it's important, what is it that we think alike about, right? So if we think alike about the problem and the task that we need to solve, maybe that's not good. But if we think alike in terms of our team is good and this is how we work together and we should collaborate, that's a good thing. So starting to break apart what are the aspects of those shared mental models is kind of the next step in what people are working on right now. Reflexivity seems to be really beneficial for problem solving and creativity, because what that means is that after we do something, we reflect on what we did, we learn from the mistakes that we made, and we identify the things that we did well, so we can make sure that we do them again. And we go, okay, what changes need to happen? And then we act on it. Okay? And what we find is that reflexive teams change their strategies and learn from their past efforts. A lot of the work on reflexivity, by the way, has been done with Michael West. And he did a lot of work with the National Health System in the UK, finding that those teams that reflected more were more creative, more innovative, and were able to change and adapt to new circumstances. But reflection is hard. Day to day, we don't usually take the time to sit down and go, okay, we just finished this important task. Let's take an hour to think about what we did, right? No, we put a check mark, we cross it off our to-do list, and we go, okay, the next thing, because we're busy. So we don't reflect, and that's not good. Again, this is where leaders can make a big difference, because you as a leader can say, we're going to take the time to reflect. We're going to sit here and talk about it. Now, you could also see how social processes matter here, because when we sit and reflect, what are we doing? We're communicating, right? That's a social process. You have to have trust, because otherwise, the person that goes, you know, I think there was a problem here, they're not going to bring it up. And if they don't bring it up, you can't fix it for the next time. When we talk about creative problem solving, there's a number of processes that occur. I'm going to focus specifically on problem identification, construction, and a little bit on solution evaluation. There's a ton of research on idea generation, so I really don't want to focus on that much at this talk, but happy to answer that in the Q&A. So during problem construction, what we do is we recognize that there's a problem to be solved, right? That's not always easy to find. A good example of that is the development of penicillin, right? So you had a scientist go to the lab, put the stuff in the petri dish, wait for it to grow. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. Lots of scientists look at those petri dishes, and the ones where nothing grew, they went, okay, that's an error, and they threw them away. Until somebody said, hey, wait a minute, what is causing this? What is happening here? And penicillin was discovered. It's a really important discovery, but nobody bothered to ask the question. So you have to ask those kinds of questions. What is the nature of the problem? Is there a problem? What are we trying to solve for? The question that you ask can be so important because it guides you toward a particular solution. Now, what we're finding is that past experiences really make a big difference in how you frame questions and how you think about problems. And if you've worked in an interdisciplinary team, you will find out very quickly that disciplines shape how we think about problems. But any past experience, right? Whether it's gender-based, race-based, age-based. Why aren't there apps for older adults? Because the young adults can't think like older adults. They don't have those experiences. When we think about a problem, when we construct a problem, we identify what the goals are, what constraints we have, and from past experience, we develop this problem representation. It's a cognitive structure that includes our past experience with problem solving, that includes the information about goals and restrictions or constraints, what information we needed, and the process that we went through to solve the problem. And when we see a new problem, we tend to think about it based on those cognitive structures. And it typically happens automatically. And you know it happens automatically because if you think about it, when you had a problem and you went to a friend and all of a sudden they said, did you try to think about the problem this way? Right? And sometimes you go, no, I didn't try to think about the problem this way. And that shows you how you automatically do this. Now, interestingly, what we're finding is that creative individuals and experts tend to spend a lot of time thinking about how to construct problems. They spend, in one study, they found that experts spend 75% of their time constructing a problem and only 25% of the time solving it. My own research suggests that when we tell people to construct problems, they solve the problem more creatively. So when we force them to break out of this automatic process, they solve the problem more creatively. Now, there's very little about team problem construction, but what we do know is that sometimes in teams, because of those different experiences, we will get people with different ways of constructing the problem, and that gap between how one person and another person suggests the problem should be constructed is called R gap, representation gap. And what we're finding is that large R gaps can work in one of two ways. They either really help you be creative, or they derail problem solving completely. Okay? So when our gaps are large and the team is not communicating well, they focus on the differences and it creates conflict. But if the differences are discussed effectively, you get more creative ideas or creative solutions. So again, this is where if you could harness those social processes, the communication and the trust and so forth, you can benefit from those cognitive differences. But you have to be able to talk about them, and you have to be able to talk about them in a positive way, not fight over them. And again, this is where leaders can make a big difference, because they could facilitate that civil discourse or not. Now, my most recent research that was published in December actually found that when we give teams instructions to engage in problem construction, we tell them to actively process the problem and discuss how they construct the problem, we saw modest improvements in creativity, but huge improvements in lower conflict and improved satisfaction with team processes. So this cognitive process can also influence the social process. So again, we get these cycles. I'm going to skip this. Okay, solution evaluations. Again, a lot of times what happens with creativity, people focus on brainstorming, right? How many of you have done brainstorming? Yeah, not too many. Yeah. Now, what typically happens, particularly if you've been in a bad brainstorming experience, is somebody comes in, right? You have this facilitator, or the leader is the facilitator, and they go, "We're going to brainstorm," and you brainstorm for a while, and you end up with 150 ideas, and you stop. And then what? Nobody knows what to do with those 150 ideas, so nothing happens. We spend an hour brainstorming and we do nothing. Because we didn't take this last step of evaluation. When you brainstorm, when you have multiple ideas on a new process or a new solution to a problem or a new product, you need to evaluate it. And you need to make some choices. because you cannot implement all of the ideas that are developed, whether it's because of time, whether it's because of funding, it doesn't matter. We have limited resources and we need to know where to invest them. So we need to evaluate. And this is where diversity matters as well, right? So in problem construction, diverse people will view the problem differently. With idea evaluation, the implications of different solutions, the unintended consequences that can happen may differ based on various characteristics, whether they're demographic characteristics or functional job characteristics. Now, what is interesting is that we find that creative people tend to recognize creativity much more readily than less creative people. So when you're giving somebody a creative idea, if they're creative, they're going to go, oh, that's creative. If they're not so creative, they're going to go, oh, that's strange. That's not going to work. So ideally, you would like your leader to also be creative if you're interested in creativity, right? If you're not interested in creativity, then all bets are off. But if you're interested in a creative solution, you want the people making the decision to be able to recognize it as a creative idea. The domain you're coming from and the domain of the problem can influence the evaluation of the solution. Okay? So, when we talk about coming up with the next big product, let's say, that will replace our smartphones instead of what we have right now, and I can't even envision what that would look like, we have different criteria for what is good than if we're going with, I want to do something creative for lunch, right? I'm judging food creativity. That's different than developing a new product to replace a smartphone. So you need to understand the domain you're coming from and have different perspectives on what that would mean. We also find that when the evaluation happens, early or late in the process matters. So if you evaluate early, it's a lot easier to incorporate and make changes, right? Don't you hate the person that comes in after you've made all the decisions and then they go, hey, and why don't we change this, this, and this and do something completely different after you spent 3 months figuring something out, right? We're much more resistant to changes late in the process. We also find that people are terrible, kind of the general people are terrible at recognizing creative ideas, okay? We're just not good at it. In one of my studies, we found that we asked teams to evaluate ideas. We gave them a range of different ideas. Some were creative, some were not. 55% of the time they were successful in choosing the idea to implement as either a creative idea or just a good idea that was not necessarily original. That meant that 45% of the time they chose lousy ideas. I'm talking lousy. That's pretty scary, from my perspective at least. But if we provide structure and thought process and explain to people how to identify creative ideas, they tend to do better. Still not great, but better. We were able to reduce it from 45% of the time choosing bad ideas to about 20% of the time. So we have evidence that similarity in cognition can be beneficial in some ways, but diversity in cognition tends to be much more important for creativity. When those social deficits can be overcome, that allows us to take advantage of those diverse cognitive processes. So the social processes really, really matter. And social deficits can be overcome by time and getting to know team members, but they can also be overcome by leadership. So what can leaders do? And I mentioned some things, but leaders, one of the big things leaders can do is provide resources, and those resources can be time, funds, materials, people, information. All of that is important. But most importantly, leaders provide direction and vision. And if that direction and vision focuses on collaboration and creativity, that's where you will get those effective social processes and collaborative efforts that can lead to creativity. Leaders can provide role models, be role models, both in terms of those effective social processes as well as the cognitive processes. You know, if they themselves think more creatively, they will, and encourage creativity in the followers, you will see more creativity. Leaders can create a culture of openness and inclusiveness that is really critical for accepting that diversity of thought that comes with a diverse team. So how do we facilitate inclusiveness? We facilitate inclusiveness by being open ourselves, not jumping to conclusions, by asking questions, by being respectful, by attempting to understand the other person, and encouraging voices from everybody. Leaders need to make sure that they engage all members. You have always in a team somebody that's more quiet, somebody that's more reluctant to speak up, particularly if they are a minority member, right? So if you have mostly men and 1 or 2 women, they're more likely to be quiet. Your job as a leader is to make sure that they're heard. And you could do that by asking them directly, making sure that their voices are heard in the group, and not just those people that are willing to speak up. You can facilitate a culture of collaboration. Again, emphasizing the importance of it, showing people how to do it, and providing support, particularly, again, to those minority members. They need more support than other people because it's an uncomfortable situation to be in the minority. You're different. And you may need different types of support. So it's important to find out what those members need, what will encourage them to speak up. So again, if you have questions later, want to find me, my email is up there. Feel free to contact me. And I'm also on Twitter, sort of, sometimes. I mainly read a lot. I don't tweet a lot, but yeah. So thank you again very much. Thank you for the invitation. It was great.
And then we will have time for, so if you can give the question. So thanks a lot, Roni, for the very, microphone. Yes, that's on. So thanks a lot, Roni, for the very interesting speech. And I saw already that there are questions, but we will do the question after the second presenter. So it's a pleasure to introduce Caroline. Caroline Dessent completed her bachelor in chemistry at Oxford University, and then her PhD in physical chemistry at Yale University. So after that, she took a research position at the University of York, and she's now currently a reader in physical chemistry at the University of York. So I introduced her a little bit longer because I want to show you two different part of her CV. So the first one is a scientific part, and she is very successful in her research, as is demonstrated by the fact that she held a Royal Society University Research Fellowship from 1999 to 2008, and then an ERC grant from 2008 to 2015. And her research group work on photoactive molecules and ensembles with application biological systems and human health. From the other side, next to her research, Caroline has been a keen advocate of supporting the careers of women in science for many years. She was part of the first action group that was formed in the Department of Chemistry at York to initiate a program of action to support the careers of women. The activities of this group evolved over the time, and this brings them to 2007 to get the first Athena SWAN Gold Award. And she was renewed, this Athena SWAN Gold Award was renewed in 2011 and 2015. This award recognizes significant and sustained progression and achievement in promoting gender equality. The Department of Chemistry at York University was the first one in the UK to be awarded of the Athena SWAN Gold Award, and she's the only department in the UK to have held 3 consecutive gold awards. So she's now still very active in promoting equality and diversity as inside the department, inside the University of York, and also in the Royal Society of Chemistry, and she's working as assessor for the Athena SWAN program. So I'm very curious to learn more about Athena SWAN program, and Caroline will tell us about programs developed to support the careers of women in science since the beginning of the new millennium. She will present highlights from the department work to support women in science and the work they do more generally to support equality, diversity, and inclusion. And she will also summarize the work involved to apply for an Athena SWAN award and the assessment process. So please, Caroline, welcome.
Thank you for the introduction. It's very kind. Okay, I'm going to play with this for a second, I guess, until I work out. Okay, so I thought I'd just start off by telling you what I'm going to talk to you about today. And I was going to begin just by telling you a little bit about myself. You've already heard a bit now, so I might shorten that bit, I think, after that. But I'm going to move on then to tell you about the policies that we've adopted in the Department of Chemistry at the University of York. So really, most of what I'm going to tell you about today is work that's really focused from a departmental level, so rather than from, you know, an institution level. And I think that really does make it probably much easier to get things done when you're working on a departmental scale. But I am also involved at the university level in trying to expand some of the work that we've been effective in doing, you know, within our department as well. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the details, really, of some of the schemes and the policies that we've adopted over the years. And then I'll move on later in the talk to explain a bit more about what this Athena SWAN scheme is that we have in the UK that supports really gender equality in higher education. So you've actually just kind of heard a bit about my CV, and I wanted to just, I suppose, just to kind of start off by providing a little bit of background. I've been at the University of York for quite some time, as you can see from this. I came there from the States, and really I've had all of my grown-up academic career, if you like, in chemistry at York. So I've been there for some time, and I've had a number of fellowships, and I've got my own research group that's very active. And alongside this work, I suppose, perhaps a little bit more interesting in some ways, I think it's very important to be upfront about this, because when we talk about gender equality, of course, we often are talking about family responsibilities where women are concerned. And so alongside my career at York, I've had 3 children, and having them spaced out over 9 years has been, you know, a somewhat interesting kind of social experiment, I suppose. Back when I had my son in the year 2000, that was, you know, quite a while ago now, and I had perhaps what was very typical at the time, quite a short period of maternity leave, came back to work quite quickly I'd just been awarded a very prestigious fellowship, so, you know, I was very conscious of this responsibility to move forward with my research at that time. Sort of 5 years later, when I had my first daughter, I think that this was around the time when really people were beginning to think more openly about supporting women's careers in higher education. And over those years, really those 5 years, there had been a change, I think, in terms of what was expected, really, of you as a working mother. And so I did return to work full-time after having my first daughter, but I worked very flexibly. So this was really a period where you could, think of me having experienced returning from maternity leave and, working sometimes at weekends, sometimes in the evening, balancing childcare with my partner. When I had my third child in 2009, I suppose, as both a country but also as a department, were kind of moving forward again, and it became, I think, much more common to really return to work part-time. These things are always personal decisions, of course, and so there's a little bit of that that's gone on behind here as well. But certainly when I returned to work after having my third child, I worked 60% full-time equivalent, and then I've kind of moved back up over the years since then. In fact, I still work part-time, and that's very common in my department, in fact. So my interest in gender equality is very much driven, by my own personal experience. And I think that can be really important, if you're working on these policies, to have that lived experience is so crucial. And really for people, who are here and are in positions of responsibility where they're leading departments or faculties, the place to start is by talking to people if you want to make things better, for all of your workforce. So I thought I'd tell you now a bit more about chemistry at York and what we've been doing there. There's a nice picture here of somebody with some glass bottles. So this is very typical, I think, of what you think about as chemists. But we do have, really very wide range of different types of chemistry going on. Now, the picture on this slide is, again, a very typical picture, in fact. So I'm showing you some statistics here from the UK higher education chemistry community. And this is what's described as a scissors plot. Now, I've shown you the results here for chemistry, but really we could look at, very many different disciplines, and the picture would be very much the same. So looking for chemistry, I suppose, specifically, what you can see here as we're moving along from left to right is we're going up through the career structure from undergraduate up to full professor. And I suppose what you can see is that we go from a situation where we're roughly 50-50%, a bit below that, really, to be honest. But then as we move up through the different stages of PhD, into early career researchers, and then into kind of permanent academic roles, we're losing approximately 10% of the females at each stage as we go through that. And so the data that I'm showing here is from 2014. There's always quite a lag with national statistics, so there are some slightly more recent ones available now, and in fact, they're very, very similar. So if we're looking in the UK at chemistry professors, it's about 9% female. And I think although, we're all very used to looking at these sort of plots, you're interested in this area by coming today, so you know this. But what is really important for us to remember is that when we're losing these percentages at each stage, is we're really losing talent when we lose those people. Yeah. And not just talent, but individuals. And so really, this is individuals' lives that we're seeing, being lost on these plots. And this is why this is so important, I think, that we don't just accept this, but really try to change this picture. So that was the national picture. And this slide shows you the situation for us in York chemistry. And again, we're going along the plot from left to right, from undergraduate up to professor. And I'm showing you two sets of data here. I hope you can still see them more or less with the colors being a little bit blurred here. But basically, you're looking at our results over 10 years, a 10-year period from 2008 to 2018. And what you can sort of see here is that we're doing quite a bit better over the last 10 years at not losing that kind of 10% that you're seeing being lost over the page. And that's particularly true if we go from undergraduate to our PhD cohort of students. So we're really maintaining our females going into doing PhDs. But really importantly, and this was something we're very proud of, we've been able to do the same thing with our researchers now, our early career researchers. So we're really maintaining that pipeline, as it's often called, of female staff right through that level. And in fact, even up into our junior lecturers. Really, I suppose, for us looking at this plot here, our females are in fact too successful probably, or our recruitment of females is maybe, of course, there's small numbers, so we really are just talking about perhaps one individual here, too many. But the truth is that, we're doing really, really well right the way through lecturer, but we do still see this fall off, as we go up into the senior ranks. For us at professor level, we have 16% of our staff are female, of the professoriate in the department. So that compares to 9% nationally, so it's quite a bit better, but we would really like to see this, to be better as well, of course. The problem is that although, we have our females moving through the department and being promoted, we have this very big group of male professors who, of course, don't move very quickly. So we lose very few staff. And so it is really a long-term problem that you're looking to fix when you're trying to move these statistics, particularly at the highest levels. So that's really important to remember, I think, because it is easy to look at that and think that's maybe not so good. One way we perhaps prefer to look at it is that we actually have 9% of all the chemistry professors in the UK at York. So almost 10% of all the female chemistry professors in the UK are at York is perhaps a slightly nicer way to look at this. And this plot shows you how things are improving. So it's really giving a picture of how the senior female chemistry academics are, have improved at York over the years. So there's a good progression happening here, but really important to say that it is slow, and that when you start working in this area, it's very unlikely that you will see changes. Probably even over a period of 5 years is going to be the type of timescale that you might expect to see these numbers moving. Really, 10 years is a more realistic timescale. And that makes this a very difficult problem in some ways. It's sort of like, it's a political problem, because for somebody to be a leader and to take charge of trying to start this change happening, nobody is really attracted to a problem that's not going to pay off for 10 years. Yeah. So we need a very wide buy-in to this problem, I think, and a long-term commitment to really make that happen. So aside from the numbers, I thought you might like to see some pictures of the individuals here. So we have these women in our department, but one of the things that's really important to say is that these women are very successful women as well. So on this slide here, you can see some of our successful women at York in chemistry, and I wanted to highlight some of the prizes that they've won as well. So we have Professor Lucy Carpenter up here in the top left-hand side, and she's a very eminent atmospheric chemist. She sits on the World Ozone Panel, and she's won some awards recently, a very prestigious UK award in 2017. We've got Professor Pratibha Ghai up here on the right-hand side. She's a Fellow of the Royal Society as well from 2017. And then down below we have Dr. Kirsty Penkman and Dr. Jackie Hamilton. Again, both of those award winners. And for everybody except Professor Pratibha Ghai, all three of these women have families. All three of them have worked part-time, and in fact were working part-time through several of their promotions. And this is a very common demographic in our department. So what we've been able to show, and we talk about this a lot to all of our younger career researchers, so this is an open, kind of piece of information that we share, is that it's very possible to have a successful academic career while raising a family at the same time, and also while working part-time at the same time. And I think that's an incredibly important message to give to your, the younger women in your department if you're looking to keep them as scientists long-term. So we quite like to show this picture, but we've heard quite a lot about strength in diversity, I suppose. We're very inspired by the idea that, you know, creativity is helped really by diverse teams in science. And so this is an article that it's quite nice to go and have a look at this article, really. But it's been something that we've very much found in our department. You know, you sometimes when you go around and talk about these things, you can get a lot of negativity. People will say it's not really possible to have a high-level scientific career if you work part-time, or, you know, people who lead departments will often feel their department is going to collapse if they start, you know, allowing their academic staff to work part-time or have, you know, extended maternity leaves. All of these, you know, kind of ideas is still very prevalent, I think, in higher education. And really, this has not been our experience at York. You know, since we've adopted these policies, the department has gone from strength to strength in terms of its research income and, you know, the quality of publications on, you know, all of these kind of ways that you can mark the output. Our department is very certainly, you know, nowhere near to collapsing. So I suppose it's just good to go on and tell you a little bit about what some of the policies are that we've actually gone and adopted here. And one thing that I really want to stress that has been important to us at York is that in everything that we do, we don't just focus on the women. So we have always adopted policies that are applicable to both male staff and female staff. We don't really ever have sort of activities that are just focused on women. So we've never kind of, I suppose, gone in for events that are purely, you know, female-focused symposia or female-focused lunches. We've always made the work that we've done around gender equality and other diversity work in the department something that's open to everybody. And our aim has been to have, or to introduce policies that are transparent and clear. And that helps, you know, some of really the male staff as well as the female staff, because, you know, human beings are complicated, you know, individuals, we all know this. And you know, it's very clear that, you know, this is just as important for some of the male staff as it is for the female staff. And so I just wanted to say that really up front here. One of the big things are family-friendly policies. That must be one of the places that you need to start when you engage with this sort of work. And probably the most important thing that we've done in our department is give an assurance that for any staff member, and that's not just academic staff, so this also applies to our kind of professional support staff, as we call them in the UK, so our administrative staff, our financial staff. So all of the staff in the department have the ability to work part-time if they want to. They can request that change to their contracts with the guarantee that they will be allowed to go back into full-time or more full-time work when they want to. So this gives staff members a real confidence that if they need to, they can work part-time, but they will be able to change that again, you know, very, very easily. Now, this is something we can probably do in chemistry at York, because we're quite a big department. And of course, this would be much more of a challenge if it was a department with perhaps just 10 academic staff members. But really, I think with this kind of thing, it's often having the belief that you can make it work that will make this work. And it's very often the case that when one staff member, you know, reduces their hours, another will want to increase their hours, or you might have somebody returning to work from different types of leave. So these things can be balanced with, as long as you go in with the attitude that you can make this work. So this part-time working guarantee has been, I think, really critically important in making life, you know, a little bit easier for people who are balancing different sorts of family responsibilities. And I would say that this is not just about children. This is certainly also about other types of caring responsibilities. We have one female professor currently who works 80% FTE so that she can support an elderly mother. And this is, you know, treated in exactly the same way. We have staff members who are managing different kinds of health conditions, and they also work part-time as a preference, just to allow them flexibility then to have more time to rest. So there are many different reasons why our staff members choose to work part-time, but the flexibility is there. We also do the other things that are probably a little bit easier. We do allow staff to work flexibly. That's something that just happens very easily, and we tend to not, really, ever organize things outside of core hours. So all meetings are happening between 10 and 4 o'clock to make things easier for people who maybe, have pick-up responsibilities at school or whatever. And I think it's really true to say that these do benefit both the men and women, and, particularly in terms of the flexible working, we have many fathers in the department who share these roles with, their wives and partners who are working, so this is just common kind of practice. And I think, as I already mentioned as well, also seeing this promotion while working part-time is very common for us. Actually, I noticed when I looked over this slide earlier on that I've left off maternity leave from here. But of course, we have some very detailed policies as well to guide staff members through periods of maternity or paternity or adoption leave. And we have all of this guidance is written down so that things must be discussed with managers about what is going to happen when people are on leave, what's going to happen when they come back, what sort of support they need. We were talking earlier on about how email is handled while you're on leave. And so this is one of the things that there's a discussion about up front before people go on leave. So there's a lot of detailed policy work that goes on here, behind some of these things. And I think this is quite a nice slide. So this is, again, you're looking at a time plot here from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. And the orange blocks are showing you the percentage of female staff who work part-time. Now, these are just our academic and research staff here, so not our administrative staff that we're showing. But you can see how we currently have about 14% of our academic and research staff of the females who work part-time. And that's increased over the years, which is perhaps what you'd expect. But the thing that we're quite proud of is the way that the blue blocks are also going up. So those are our male researchers and academics now who are also working part-time. And so it's just around 6% from 2017. It's gone up slightly again. And we absolutely do we have a male professor who's worked part-time while he was adopting a son, and he worked part-time for a year so that he could spend time with, with his adopted child. We have another male academic who's a senior lecturer who works 80% of full-time equivalent. So he shares the work of, childcare. He has 2 children. And so I think it's such a rewarding thing, because what that really shows me is that the men in our department have seen the women making a success of working part-time. They've seen that nothing awful has happened, to the women when they've started to work part-time. And they're now adopting that behavior. And of course, that's really what we want, isn't it? To have a situation where, all of this is really shared out much more between men and women. Yeah. How am I doing for time? Let's have a look. No, we're fine. Promotion is another area that's critically important. And it's all very well and good for us as a department to have kind of guidance about promotion and to have, leaders whose responsibility it is to encourage females to go for promotion. But what we've also found is that you need to really have advocates for when you put forward promotion from your department within your institution. And we had a case just last year where a female member of staff who'd worked part-time went for promotion. The documentation went out to the department. It was actually rejected by the university. And our head of department then had to personally take the time to calculate, if you like, all of the outputs that member of staff had actually done. And in fact, after doing that, he was able to show that this was completely equivalent, really, to somebody who had worked full-time, and the application went through and the promotion was successful. But it does perhaps show that sometimes you do need that leadership again to really, intervene when it's needed. It can be quite important, I think, with promotion activities. Support for so postdoctoral staff are our early career researchers, and we do a huge amount of work with these people in chemistry at York. We actually have an equality and diversity officer, and she works very closely with our postdoctoral researchers, provides a lot of kind of careers support, long-term careers planning, and you know, also activities around training really for these researchers. So this is a very, you know, very sensitive point in the career of many young people, and it is somewhere that I think there's widespread acknowledgement that you need to support the careers at this stage. So I'm certainly happy to talk about, you know, some more about that as well, if people would like me to. Probably one of the things that's a bit more unusual that we do in chemistry at York is that we take the time to train both our staff but also our students about equality and diversity. So this is something that we've now done for a few years, and so PGR is postgraduate researchers. That's actually our PhD students. So our equality and diversity officer, she runs training sessions on equality and diversity for our PhD students. And this is really important, of course, because those PhD students are also teaching some of our undergraduates, you know, in the chemistry lab. So it's really quite crucial that they already have a bit of that understanding, you know, of the issues around this. And more recently, we've also introduced a session for our undergraduates as well. That's a bit more of a challenge, but we see this as being something that's really important as part of your professional development these days. You know, if you're getting ready to go into the workplace, you know, our undergraduates need some understanding of what's really expected of them, and, you know, with respect to equality and diversity as well. But those are just two things that go on. We have a very wide range of activities that sort of go across the department. So although the work largely comes out of a committee, if you like, the kind of initiatives and the policies, we kind of have a sense that the whole department is involved. And we do that in different ways. So that's both by giving talks at staff meetings, you know, to the staff-student forum meetings, but also we have lunchtime fora, which are just open sessions where there are different topics, and they're open to everybody in the department to come along and exchange ideas and discuss things. So there's a big kind of culture around equality and diversity that we've been able to set up. And I think that does make things very open and acceptable, you know, around these types of issues. And this is really, again, just some bullet points to highlight some of these activities of, you know, where we do all of this work. I mean, really, we've tried to sort of take a step back and to think about putting equality and diversity everywhere so that it's something that's discussed on all committee meetings. You know, there are opportunities for people to feed back via surveys quite regularly about things. So we're able to both monitor but to take ideas, you know, right across the staff and student groups in the department. Recruitment is the final area that I just wanted to highlight, and I'm sure you're all, you know, very conscious about this. Again, we've worked on this in ways that are, I think, quite widespread, you know, and quite well known. And then also we have this unconscious bias observer scheme. I'm not going to talk about this in detail because I'm conscious that Professor Paul Walton, I think, spoke about this a couple of years. I'm not sure when that was, a couple of years ago. So I wasn't going to go into the details of this. But I'm happy to answer questions for those who maybe aren't familiar with this afterwards again. Right. I wanted just to put one slide in to say that we don't just work around gender equality. I'm the chair currently of the Equality and Diversity group in chemistry. And so we do cover, you know, all aspects of equality and diversity and try to work, you know, as widely as possible around this. So the work we're doing certainly isn't just around gender. And I've included a slide that highlights, I think that work with LGBT staff and students has been one of the things that's been really strong for us in chemistry at York. But I think it just highlights again, you know, that by having a culture that's open and accepting, that you're able to foster an environment that, you know, should be really something where all of your staff and students can really flourish. So I'm only really highlighting this as being one of the areas that we've got quite a bit of strength in. what do you need to get this to work? That's the thing. So apart from patience, that this is not going to be a quick fix, I think you really do need a widespread, kind of interest and involvement in this. This cannot just come from one or two individuals in a department who are trying to drive this forward. As an individual, you can certainly make a difference. I wouldn't say that to stop any of you thinking that you can't make a difference. Whatever career stage you're at, you have a position as an advocate to push for change and a responsibility, I think really, I'd really stress that. This isn't just something that comes from the leadership, but very much you will make things happen more quickly if you have the support of the senior leadership. And that's been really, really, essential at York. We've been extremely lucky in chemistry to have had some really strong heads of department who are very open to supporting women in science and other forms of diversity. And there's a picture of our current head of department, Duncan Bruce. And he is a member of the Equality and Diversity Committee, and he's there so that he can action things. And that is absolutely essential, I think. If you're trying to get things done, you need your leaders on board because they will be the ones that can actually really make things happen, I think, at the end of the day. And I think the other big tip is that, to me, one of the real strengths we've had in our department is having policies that really are both for men and women. And that's important because it means that you can take everybody with you, that you don't set up a situation where the men will say this is unfair, or you're already sort of creating, a chasm between different groups in your department. If you work with policies that support everybody, this should be the way long-term that will really make the difference for us, I think. You also need money, and you do need people to do this work as well. It's something that, all of this work around human resources takes time. It takes time for people to monitor that things, that forms are being filled in the right way, that people are being recruited in the right way. So this for us there are three really almost full-time people that work around this area in our department. They do other things, but they have a big commitment into supporting this work. So some of the things that I've told you about have gone into getting us these awards, these Athena SWAN Awards. And so just towards the end of the talk, I thought I'd share with you a bit more about this process of Athena SWAN and what it actually means. And so you've already heard some of these statistics, so I won't dwell on that too much. But on this slide here, I've just kind of highlighted a little bit about what the Athena SWAN scheme is. And so it does look at representation. It looks at progression. So it's about really supporting from the student level up through the career structure, a situation of gender equality. And really, it's about the working environment that staff, are operating in. So the charter has been going for a number of years now, but it was expanded in 2015. So the scheme, as it now stands, it was originally just about science, but it now covers all academic departments in the UK. You don't have to take part in the scheme, but it really is becoming the norm, I would say. So having the scheme and having people be successful in the scheme is driving the sector really to adopt this very, very widely, I think it's fair to say. And so in the newly formed charter, it also includes administrative staff as well as research and academic staff. It also covers explicitly trans staff and students. And, it deals with gender equality. So this is not just about women in science or, women in academia. It explicitly deals with gender inequalities. And, this in chemistry, we're close to 50-50 for our undergraduates, but that's not the case everywhere. And for example, in biology, there are more females at the earlier levels. They again drop off as you go up through it. But if you have more females than males, then the work would center around recruiting more males. So really this is about balance for both genders. And so on this slide, they aren't very nice to look at, I think, some of these slides, but I think it's useful just to write these points down. And again, I'm happy to share this for the slides to be shared afterwards, but it goes through some of the Athena SWAN principles. And these are things that, you might well expect to see on a list that concerns a gender charter. It wants to recognize the talents of all staff. It wants to tackle gender pay gaps. It wants to make, promotion equal across different, bands, across the two genders, across different bands of the career stages. And also some of these more specific problems like short-term contracts that really affect earlier career staff as well. So there are specific things that the Athena SWAN Charter aims to actually address. And the process is a somewhat circular process, if you like. When you decide to embark upon trying to gain an Athena SWAN award, the first stage in the process is this form the SAT over here. So the SAT is an acronym that stands for Self-Assessment Team. So that would be a group of people within a department or within an institution if it was for an institutional award. And they would be the people most concerned with moving forward the work then towards gaining an award. What would happen is that team would meet, and the first job of the team is to analyze the data for your department. So this is a huge data gathering exercise that's involved here of looking at gender distribution, both for your students, so both undergraduate and postgraduate students, but then also for the different categories of staff within the department as well. So you can probably appreciate, without sort of thinking about it too much, that does involve quite a lot of work. And the kind of things you're going to be looking at there are whether there are part-time working, how many staff take up flexible working, what staff are being promoted, how are the gender differences around promotion, are there gender differences around pay. So there's a lot of detailed work that goes on at that stage. When you have that data, you then want to look at it and analyze it and see where the biggest problems are for you. And it's at that stage that you then begin to develop actions to address some of these problems, yeah. And so you'll see how that comes into the awards in a second or two. Sometime later, you'll then write your application. So all of this data goes into your application alongside your action plan for addressing some of these problems. Then you submit your application and you wait to see if you get an award, is what happens. So these are the different bits that you have to write about in your application. And this really is like writing probably a master's thesis, I think it's fair to say. This is quite a big piece of work that goes on in terms of actually writing down all of these things and describing, giving some narrative, if you like, to the data that you're looking at. And I just thought I'd put in these pictures here. So we're in a situation where we've just had to reapply. So you get your award for so many years, and then you have to apply again. So we're currently in the kind of nervous position, I suppose, of waiting to see whether our most recent application has been successful. So the award is in at the moment and is being assessed. And this is us by the Christmas tree. So this was the key team that were involved in writing the current submission. So it was the last day of our academic term, so the Christmas tree had gone up already at that point, and there's just a pile of printouts, from the last week. But yes, it's not to joke. This is a substantial piece of work that's involved in putting together one of these awards. And at the end of this process, if you're successful, you'll gain an award at one of 3 different levels, so bronze, silver, or gold. Bronze is really the entry level where you're able to show that you do have the data to look at and reflect on. So it's very much the beginning of the process, if you like, gaining a bronze award. To move up to silver, you need to be able to show that some of the actions that you've put in place have had an impact. And that can be quite a challenge sometimes because, of course, can you really always link an action to an outcome? Is quite a challenge. And in fact, that bar is then increased as you go to a gold award. So you must be able to, again, show that you've had impact, but it must be sustained and continued over a period of time. And in addition to that, you also have to demonstrate that you're a beacon of achievement. So this, again, involves a lot of work. What that means is quite a number of different things, but But one of them might be going out and giving talks like this, for example. I mean, other perhaps less glamorous beacon activities would be sharing your policies with other departments at the university. It could be running seminars, you know, for other departments at the university to come and attend so they can learn from your good practice. It's writing newspaper articles and things in magazines to, you know, to talk about what you're doing. So there's a lot of work that goes on for a gold department, really, to maintain this national profile that alongside the award. Then the awards are decided by quite small panels, actually, so usually just 5 or 6 people, and they'll all be people who have some kind of background in equality and diversity. They're all from higher education institutes. But it does, in some ways, it is a slightly soft process whether you gain an award or not. And that's maybe one of the problems of the scheme, I suppose. The panel is supposed to reach a consensus at the end of this process. That's the idea, and that usually is the case, I would say. So I just thought you might like to give you an idea, really, of what tends to happen to applications. This is a slide from the organisation that runs the Athena SWAN scheme. And so this is particularly about silver application. Oh, this is, actually, no, this is talking about all of it. I'm going to show you the silver ones on the next slide. So in this round from April 2018, you can see that there were 203 applications, 148 awards. So around a 75% success rate, but that means about a quarter are unsuccessful. And, you know, it really is quite a lot of work to be unsuccessful at the end of this scheme, is something that you might like to consider. And I thought that also that covers over a little bit of what's going on behind you. So this is specifically about silver awards here. And if you look at the big picture, it looks not too bad. It's saying, you know, 82% are successful, so about 18% are unsuccessful. But if you look at the numbers in the table on the left-hand side, what it shows you is that some of those that they say are successful are actually successful at the lower level. So it means that they're being awarded a bronze award. So it actually is, you know, quite tough, the scheme. And I think this is really one of the things that, again, you know, is leading to a big discussion within the UK higher education community. And I just thought I'd end by kind of putting down a couple of pros and cons of the scheme, you know, that's worth maybe thinking about if you're thinking about, you know, developing something like this or adopting something like this. And, you know, really, I think there are advantages to this scheme. There's no doubt that it's brought gender equality much more onto the agenda for UK universities. I mean, really, the leadership at universities has had to, you know, to face up to this, and almost every university will have committees and structures now that are putting forward policies to support gender equality. The Athena SWAN scheme is currently going through an assessment, so it's looking at its impact over, you know, approximately the last 10 years. So that's going on, and the results of that will be coming out in the autumn. And I think, you know, when you have this process of looking at the data, it does drive you to action. There's no doubt about that. You know, even for us as a gold department, we can often be really surprised or shocked when we look at some of the statistics, you know, that we generate ourselves. And so the process of looking at the data is really important, really, really important. But it does take time, of course, is the downside of that. And the other really good thing about the scheme, I think, is that it should mean that you have some process of continuity. So, for example, if you have a head of department who's a really good proponent of equality and diversity, of course, this, you know, your department will move forward. But then what happens if the next head of department is, you know, not so interested or, you know, even wants to block some things? Well, the Athena SWAN scheme does give you a structure for kind of moving through those periods of time, I think is, you know, certainly something that's quite important about the scheme. The disadvantages is that it is a lot of work. There's a lot of work involved in the submissions. And, you know, it's, I think, very disheartening, I'm sure you can understand, if your applications are not successful. And I have colleagues in 2 other chemistry departments who used to hold gold awards and now don't, in fact. And I think you can really see that, you know, it's hard to get through those things if you've had a gold and then you've lost it. So I'm not sure that the scheme in some ways is accepting enough of that. And it's something that, you know, maybe will lead to a backlash. So that's something they have to be careful of. You really, just as the last thing, this process of trial and error where you yourself have to suggest a remedy to a problem is maybe not the most efficient way forward. In a way, it makes all of us into social scientists, and we're probably not best at being social scientists if we're chemists, so I don't. So I just wanted to thank you for your attention, and there's just a picture here to really highlight that it isn't just me who does this work in my department at York, that there is, of course, the whole team of the Equality and Diversity Group. Some of them are on the slide here, but particularly I just wanted to mention Dr. Lainey Jones, who's our Equality and Diversity Officer in the department, so she works full-time around a lot of these initiatives, and also Dr. Helen Coombs, who is kind of our HR manager in the department, and it's absolutely essential to have somebody who knows what they're doing with HR to really keep control of that side of these activities as well. So thank you very much for your attention.
Both of the speakers here, we had, you can have some drink. Yeah, we had, as you've seen, two different perspectives. So to talk about diversity in different way, different background, and so that makes more interesting to me about this as a diversity aspect, talking about diversity. So we are open now for any question to both of the speakers.
Thanks to both of you for the very interesting presentations. I have a question for Caroline. I think the work you did is very interesting and very good, but you say that policies are mostly regarding both men and women, but then on the other hand, you're also trying to make recruitment more unbiased. But I can imagine that making it unbiased makes it feel more unfair to the people that used to be a majority. So I can imagine that a lot of men might feel resentment towards women being promoted because they might feel left out because they're men. Have you felt any resentment with regard to that, or how do you tackle that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that there's very much resentment in the department currently as things stand. And that's because we've been doing this now for a long time. I think that makes a difference. When you try to challenge these ideas initially, I think that's when you get the resentment and people become very nervous about what's going to happen. And I think it's fair to say when we first started this work that there was some of this. I'm not so sure about resentment. I think it was more what I would call sniggering. I'm not sure if that word translates very well, but kind of, you know, these sort of slight comments you might hear at the back of a staff meeting or something like this. And I think the head of department that we initially had was very, very clever about this, because I think he was aware who some of the individuals were who maybe were, you know, most saying these kind of things. And he involved them on the committee. So the very first committee, before all of these awards that we had to look at equality and diversity, he pulled on some of these people onto that committee. And in fact, you know, I think it always tends to happen. Once you start really talking about things, people just become less defensive. And, you know, really when they start to think then, oh, okay, we're going to move departmental seminars from 4 o'clock to 2 o'clock. Well, okay, if that helps some people, maybe that's not a problem. So you asked both about recruitment and promotion. And I think with recruitment, you maybe see that less because, of course, some of this is very soft, what you're doing. Yeah. If you're changing the wording or the pictures in adverts, I would hope that the males applying are not disadvantaged by that. But with promotion, really, there isn't a competition in promotion between individuals. And I guess it was something I meant to mention and I didn't, but so when we look at our rates of promotion in the department, it's 14%, both for male staff and for female staff. Now that percentage is out of eligible staff over the staff who are promoted in any one well, it's a 2-year period for promotion. So we really do have equivalent rates for men and women. I've never heard anything of the men complaining about that, but there isn't a pot of money that people are competing from.
There was a question behind first.
Yeah, thank you for both of the talks. I had a question for Roni. So in fact, I'm not from the field. That's why I was very curious. So to know what type of experiments you do to understand creativity. So you say you talked about some results, but like on what type of an experiment you said that they were creative or not. So this was my question.
So because I'm interested in creative problem solving, what we do is we've developed a number of problems that are typical to students at our university, where there is some sort of, typically an inherent conflict, so it's very difficult to achieve all the potential goals presented on the problem. We give them a vignette, and we ask them to solve it. We then have students, both undergraduate and graduate students, that are trained in the topic of creativity, so they do a number of readings before they even do this. We go through a training session of recognizing and we separately evaluate quality and originality. We use Teresa Amabile's consensual assessment technique, which has been accepted as sort of the gold standard for these kinds of evaluations for products. But we also, in addition to what she recommends, we do training. So we would sit down, they would read a handful of solutions, we would rate them, we would discuss why this is original or why is this high quality or low quality. So they get the same, so they reach agreement in terms of what is considered original and high quality, and then we evaluate them, we assess inter-rater agreement, and if that's high, that's what we use. Does that help? Yeah.
I have a question for Caroline, actually two. The first one, well first, yeah, like the other person said, it's really exciting to see what you've done. So my first question is maybe how, you said you're also working on these things at the university level now, and so I'm curious what you think about how this could be scaled up, because especially the part about promotion, that's really nice how you've kind of considered how much the person is working, which of course would account for maternity leave, those kinds of things. But I'm wondering how this can actually happen on a larger level, because so much of promotion is tied to publication, and of course if you're working less, you're not going to publish as much. So that's the first question. And then the second question, I'm curious maybe more, how have you seen maybe some kind of cultural shift as a result of more men working part-time? Because something I see here a lot is that there is the option to work, in general, I think the Netherlands is quite good for these part-time, also part-time working, but still culturally, what I see is that most women just go to part-time work, and it's assumed that they should do that. And I don't see it so much from the men. Of course, it's someone's choice. I mean, no one should be forced to do one or the other, but then I feel like there is a bit of, let's say, societal judgment if you're making one choice or the other. So that, yeah, that's the second.
Yeah. So I think just to take the second point first of all, I think we do see a cultural change in terms of the attitude of staff across the department. You know, it's very difficult always, and you hear this term about presenteeism, of course, about having to be there all of the time. And I really think we don't have that at York. It's incredibly accepted that people just have other things they might be doing apart from working. And, you know, it's very, as I say, it's just very open. If I talk to a colleague, a male colleague, and I say, can you come and do this for me? I mean, this happened, in fact, we were taking part in this impact assessment. And it was actually incredibly difficult to get the male members of staff who had children to come, because they were all picking up children, or one had to go to the hospital with his son. But it just, I mean, I'm sure it was slightly random, but it kind of reflected the fact that, you know, the men in the department are happy to share those responsibilities with their partners as well, I think. Now, of course, you cannot change, you know, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of years, whatever you want to say, of society in 10 years. But you can start to move there, and I think you're right. I think of course there are broader questions about what goes on in the home, and this has to be a part of this. But at the same time, it shouldn't stop you from trying to do these things in the workplace. That maybe means that things begin to move, to a more equal situation. So with the university, I probably wasn't quite explicit. So this Athena SWAN scheme, it both applies to institutions and also to departments. So currently at York, we have 2 gold departments, chemistry and biology, but then we have others that are silver and some that are bronze as well. So the institution is currently bronze, so our institution is at a lower level than we are as a department. So in a way, that of course creates a tension, because things that are quite commonplace for us in a department are not accepted, within the kind of hierarchical structure of the university. And, we have had, when we first developed our maternity policy, there was quite a period, an extended period, where the institution was fighting against it because they argued it was unfair to staff in other departments, and so we've had to kind of moderate, and we have come to a situation now where, in fact, the university has adopted our scheme. So I think we see really our role as being to be a beacon within the university and to help the university move its practice forward. And that's also happening with promotion. I mean, it's very shocking sometimes when you look at, guidelines for promotion. And this was the case at York until this year, in fact, where promotion to professor was just assessed over output over 3 years. There was no explicit mention that should be adjusted for part-time working. Now, they've changed it this year. But of course, this has happened partly through the lobbying that we've done. And I think to kind of address the wider point, you have to be concerned with quality rather than just quantity. Now, that's perhaps not as easy as it sounds, because I think sometimes in research, I know that myself. Sometimes it's not what you think is going to be the most successful thing that is going to be the most successful thing. So there is still, there are still challenges, and you can't run away from that. But at the same time, I think we do have lots of good examples of individuals that have made this work. So it shouldn't stop you from trying, I think. So.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much, both Roni and Caroline, for your impressive, informative and interesting presentations. I would like to follow up on some of the previous questions, because it is indeed interesting that you advocate a symmetrical solution for an asymmetrical problem. And what does this mean or imply for the trainings, your equality and diversity trainings? Do you use the same material, the same method for men and women, or? And it works for both.
Does it work for both? Well, that's a question. I'm not sure that I've really got the answer for that question, in that, and of course, this is, in some ways, this is some of the unknown for us. We can only try something, and we can see if it has a positive impact. Now, we assess that both through the data, but by talking to people is probably the big way that I would say, yeah. And I mean, if I think about this unconscious bias scheme, for example, it's really difficult to know, if that's making a difference to who you're recruiting. I mean, probably our biggest staff pool are our researchers. So we have seen movement over the last 4 years that we've been running this scheme of recruiting more females, so you might think that's good, but of course we can't prove that. But what we can do is to talk to the individuals who take part in the scheme is one of the things that we're able to do. So we can get feedback both from people who've been appointed, but also from people on the panels. And I think I would say that's very gender neutral, in fact. So we get positive feedback, both from males who are interviewed with an unconscious bias observer and from females. I don't know that this is perfect. I really think you probably have to get, yeah, it's a good point.
Actually I have several questions, but I was just thinking which one was most important. I think, so a couple of things sparked my interest. One of them was that you said that you wanted to create a possibility for people to have longer contracts, and I was wondering how that ties in with gender equality as well. I do know that it's something that my colleagues have talked to me about, and we see sort of legal problems there, and I'm just curious how you solved that, and also why we should do it actually. So maybe you can motivate us to find a good road in that. That's the first thing. And the second one was that sparked my interest was about the students, that you also involve them. It's probably for the new generation, I was thinking, but I do know that students tend to evaluate their teachers, or female teachers, lower than they do male teachers. And I was just wondering how you sort of address that in, I guess, a diplomatic way, without putting women down as well. So I'm very curious how you did that.
Yeah, I think we can't, I mean, you're right. The question about contracts is very difficult to address, because this is an external problem in terms of where funding comes from and who takes it. But so the actual work that we tend to do in chemistry, we can't, of course, control that. And it does speak to a bigger problem of really where the issues are. I mean, a lot of the time this comes from the funding councils, I think. I mean, one of the things that we have in our institution is there's very often short-term pots of money. I don't know if this is something that happens in this country as well, but so the institution will release some money. There's a short deadline. Of course, that discriminates already against part-time staff, for example. So that's not a good thing to start off with. But then the money is spent on a short-term contract or something. So, but this, of course, is being driven by national funding, as well. So there's some of this which needs to go on at a higher level. But what we are able to do is to look at what goes on more locally. So sometimes when these pots of money become available just for 6 months, what used to be the case in the department was that if a contract was for less than 6 months, it didn't have to be externally advertised. So you had a kind of a system where there could be patronage then, where perhaps a research group leader was appointing, one of their current researchers onto the short-term money. And this could happen, of course, several times. When we looked at the statistics, many more of those appointed under those contracts were male than females. I think the females were right down at around 14% of the ones who were gaining this very short term. But of course, it can be bridging funding. Although it may be short term, it can plug a gap and then somebody can go on. So we've set up now a procedure that gets around that, where anything that's available, even if for 6 months, has to be advertised within the department. So now we have a scheme. So there are things you can do locally that look at some of these ways that sometimes people are able to support their staff. But of course, the goal would be to support more people longer term. I'm sorry, yeah, so then the other thing was about the undergraduates, wasn't it? The students. Yes. No, you're absolutely right. This is a very well acknowledged problem. And I wouldn't say that we've been able to really solve that. It's something that we do talk to the undergraduates about, so that they are aware of it. But I think we still suffer from that somewhat, I would say. We have looked at the outputs of our scores, and I think we don't have quite so much diversion between the male and the females in terms of of how the students rate the lectures, but there still is a difference there, yeah. So it's not perfect, yeah. Any other?
I had a question, that perhaps relate to both talks, is how do you find the measures actually to combat some of the problems that you observe? Because as you mentioned, one of your last comments, Caroline, was that you are not social scientists. So of course you can gather, problems or experiences from people, but how do you make the link with social scientists to find solutions to these problems?
So I am a social scientist. And personnel issues is one of the areas that I deal with. Obviously, in the US, we have some different issues. So when Caroline was talking, I was thinking, well, part-time work, but we can't do it in the US because your health insurance is tied to your workplace. If you don't work full-time, you have no health insurance. Not a lot of people want to do that. And until we fix our health insurance issue, and don't get me started, that's not going to be resolved. So, you know, we have other structural problems. But for example, one of the things we did in our own department with regards to student evaluations is that we take them into account, but we also realize that this is an issue. They don't play a very strong role in our teaching evaluations of the person. We also have other issues. For example, I teach statistics. Most students don't rate statistics faculty and psychology department very highly. We know that.
We have the same problem with quantum mechanics.
Yeah. So we take into account what courses you're teaching, right? So some of the courses kind of have more appeal to students. They like them better. They tend to give higher ratings regardless. More difficult courses tend to get lower ratings. We take that into account when we are doing faculty evaluations and not rely on those to a great extent. We look at it, but you know, we look for other things for the purpose of teaching evaluations, such as, are you creating new courses? Are you teaching in kind of novel and interesting ways? We send observers to your classroom. You know, are you publishing about pedagogical issues and so forth? So there are ways that we could do this. And I actually think that relying on social scientists, you know, whether it's faculty in management or in work psychology, IO psychology, we've been studying those issues of women in the workplace, diversity in the workplace for a long time. There are remedies that can be taken. So talk to us. Let us know what your questions are, and we can tell you it doesn't have to be trial and error, because certain things have been tried and we found out that they don't work. So I think there is a definite role for social scientists in this process.
No, I should add to that we do try to use this evidence as a basis for what we implement in the department. So we very much do look at this and read the social science literature before we begin these actions, that's incredibly important. But it's harder to get the evaluation in after these things are done. So there's that's very important not to try to make it up. I think what I was really trying to say was just about the scheme and the way the scheme runs, and we see this because we've had a gold award for a long time. Of course, other people who are trying to get a silver or a gold award, they use our submissions because they're openly available, and you see all of the same things, going in. So this is quite a responsibility. Is the reality of it, and you could perhaps imagine a slightly different way for this to run, where there was perhaps more of a tick box, where the Athena SWAN, people said to you, if you implement this and this and this, you would then qualify for a bronze award, and then if you do this and this, so they could come to you and tell you which things might work best. So I was coming together with that, of course.
Any other question? Come in. Yeah.
Thank you both for your presentation. I have a question for Roni. You said that creativity, that's really important to have a diverse team. But I find that sometimes it's quite difficult because you work in a university and you have sort of like-minded people around you. How do you go about making like a truly diverse team to get like a creative solution to a problem?
Yeah, that's always the challenge, right? So, and I think to me the challenge is one of what kind of diversity you're looking for. Because I think what happens is that organizations rely on the demographic diversity. So, you see this, we're creating a team, so we need at least one woman and one man, and we need people from, 20 to 30, and then 30 to 40, and 40 to 50, whatever. And in the US, we have races, so we need to make sure that we have at least one black and one Hispanic and at least one white person. And those are boxes that are easy to fill. It also creates a lot of tokenism, right? So, as the sole woman on the committee, all of a sudden you're responsible for being the voice of the entire population of women, which is a strange place to be at. And it creates other problems. I think what you really need to think about when you're creating diverse teams is think about what is the nature of the problem and what sort of diversity would be meaningful to solving this problem, and making sure that that diversity is represented. And it, you know, make sure that you ask people, not just based on your own decisions or the leader of the committee, because you don't always know, and that's a big issue of you don't know what you don't know, right? So there might be voices out there that are important and you're not getting them because you didn't think about them up front. So you need to go out and ask people, who are the important people to represent on this committee? What sort of people?
That's very often the same people are asked for every committee. Yes. Especially people from a certain minority. Yes. And so their agenda gets completely blocked.
Well, and that gets back to some of the issue that Caroline was talking about in terms of, at least in the US, what we're finding is that women tend to serve more often on committees and do more service work. And since you only have 24 hours in a day, if you're doing more service work, you're not doing more research. You're not publishing, so that hurts your promotion criteria. So for example, one of the things we've started in our college is that now you can be promoted on the basis of service and not just research or teaching. So service is receiving a lot more acknowledgement for those people that are truly involved in research and in service and believe that that's a really important part. But you also need to pay attention to who you're choosing. This also means that new people are not being asked. It's a disadvantage to the younger folks or people new to the university that don't get asked because they're not you don't know that they exist, you don't know that they'll bring something good to the table, so you need to make sure to pay attention to that.
Thanks. I have two different questions. One is to Roni, that is, when you are teaching creativity stuff, you start with bachelors, I presume, and then how do you choose proper leadership? Because under those conditions, there is no experience. How do you do that?
So how do you choose leadership?
Yeah, that's right.
Creative teams?
Yes.
Yes, that's actually a really difficult situation because we want our leaders to be experts. And what we do a lot of times is we put people in leadership position that have the technical expertise and not necessarily the people expertise. So one of the important things that I recommend is making sure that leaders are trained on how to lead and not just how to be experts. The other thing is if you have an interdisciplinary team, who's the expert? You have multiple experts on the team, it's very difficult to have a leader with the technical expertise. So it's important to put leadership in place that actually has the people skills and the creativity skills. And again, you can train creativity and you can train people skills. So, you know, even if you have somebody that's maybe not the best person at this point, you can teach them. Creativity is not something that is innate or fixed. It's something that can be learned. So you can definitely teach people to be more creative, and you could train your leaders to at least evaluate creativity more accurately.
Yeah.
So very quickly, it's a very practical question. That is about the minimum time that you think a part-time job can be done properly, because our experience is that 3 days a week is the minimum, and then it's better to take a break. If you need more, then just take a full break. So don't spoil it by doing it 2 days a week. So what is your experience?
Thank you. Yeah, I think you do ask an interesting question, and in some ways, it's something I think there's maybe not as much research on as there could be, because we're now in a situation where we do have quite a lot of staff who have worked part-time. So it's good to be open about this and realistic about this. I think the short answer is that as academic members of staff, we find about 4 days a week is optimum, really. So you can work 80% of FTE, and that's going to give you really good still outputs in terms of how much research you can realistically still do. You probably also have a research group that I think almost certainly have a research group in chemistry at least, that you have a responsibility to. So those people do need a certain amount of contact, is my own experience. But I think, you can work 3 days a week, certainly for a period of time, and that seems to be what our staff have generally done. So we do have, academic members of staff who've worked 3 days for about a year after they've come back from a period of maternity leave, and then gone back up to about 80%. Yeah, I don't know of anybody who's done 2 days, so it seems like we're probably in agreement there.
I think we will have the last question.
Thank you. I have a question for Roni. Thanks a lot for your very inspiring talk. I learned a lot, I think. I'm glad that you came back to one of the issues you raised during your talk, and I was a bit puzzled about it. That was about that we have to think about what's the problem at stake, and then which sort of diversity matters, and then think of what would be the committee members or whatever. And I always thought that diversity matters per se, no matter what issue you have at stake. So what do you say to someone, well, we have here a chemistry problem or a physics problem, and we think this is natural sciences, and diversity just doesn't matter because it's all about molecules and wavelengths or whatever. What's your response to that?
So I think the important thing is in terms of, so 2 parts. One is there are problems where diversity matters more or less. And I think part of the problem is we don't always think about the right kind of diversity. We're thinking about which boxes we can tick or check, instead of what sort of diversity would be meaningful in terms of solving the problem. And that's what I meant. So I think for most problems, some degree of diversity is good, just because, again, our experiences shape how we think about problems. Having people with different backgrounds and experiences is going to be helpful. It might be that the diversity in a chemistry problem might be where you were trained, or the kind of chemist that you are. That's also important. And again, our research suggests that demographic diversity for creativity, at least kind of broadly speaking, is not particularly meaningful. I think that masks a lot of issues that have not been evaluated, but there might be a problem where gender just doesn't matter. But where you were trained might be, or that will shape how you think about problems. So you don't want teams of all like-minded people, regardless of the makeup of the team.
So I know that there are more questions, but we need to move us. So the 2 speakers are here for the rest of the day. So you can ask questions during the break. So I would like to call Astrid, because we would really thank the 2 speakers for the very interesting presentations they did and all the exciting exchange of questions. So we have a small gift from both of you.